Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a sweet and swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's dive right in. Seattle wore a coat of silvery gray that afternoon, the steady rain tapping a rhythmic beat against the transparent glass walls of Hale Robotics. From the outside, the skyscraper looked like a cold block of steel and glass, just like the man behind it, Ethan Hale. On the top floor, inside an office encased entirely in glass, Ethan stood still, hands in his pockets, watching the crowd below in the hall through the curtain of rain. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his back as straight as a ruler. But what drew everyone's attention was the sharp silver scar running from his left temple down to his jawbone. It stood out against his tan skin, like a deliberate slash of fate. The lab fire 15 years ago had left him with that wound. Since then, Ethan had changed, not just in appearance, but in how he treated the world. He had become known for his coldness, ruthlessness, and uncompromising stance in negotiations, showing no mercy to rivals and holding a particular hatred for the press. In the tech industry, people called him the Iron Wolf of Seattle. Today, the launch of the home medical robot, Athena, the company's passion project, had drawn the media, investors, and the most powerful figures in the city. Ethan had planned to show up right on time, say only what needed to be said, and disappear before anyone could get too close. But as he left the executive floor and strode through the lobby toward the main hall, a minor incident occurred. A petite figure stepped backward quickly to adjust her camera angle, not looking behind her, only to bump right into him. There was a soft thud, followed by a sharp intake of breath. The camera in her hands almost slipped onto the marble floor, but Ethan's reflexes, honed like a battlefield reaction, caught the strap before it fell. "Oh, I'm sorry." Her voice was low and warm, hurried but not panicked. Ethan was used to these collisions. Usually within seconds, he'd see eyes flicker to his scar, followed by awkwardness or avoidance. But this time, that didn't happen. The woman, Sienna Brooks, looked him straight in the eye. No flinching, no excessive curiosity, and no trace of pity. Her gaze was calm, still as a lake, as if the scar was just a small part of a much larger story. "Thank you for catching my camera," she said with a faint smile, her breath still carrying the chill of the rain outside. Ethan glanced at the camera. "Canon 5D, that model's been out for a while. But it's durable, and more importantly, it suits me." Her voice was steady and concise. Then she stepped aside to give him room to pass. He said nothing more, just gave a brief nod and continued. Yet in that moment, something strange happened. He, a man who never cared about strangers, felt the urge to glance back at her. On stage, Ethan appeared in a sharply tailored black suit, the lights glinting off the scar on his face, giving him an air that was both commanding and dangerous. He spoke about Athena in a deep, steady voice, each word like an executive order. The hall was silent. When he said, people listened, not out of affection, but because his presence left no room for distraction. In a corner of the hall, Sienna observed through her lens. She noticed Ethan's expression truly change only when he spoke about Athena's ability to care for elderly patients at home. Then his voice lost some of its edge, some of its chill, as if something buried deep had slipped past his armor. The ceremony ended, and the crowd flowed toward the cocktail area. Ethan slipped into a side exit to leave. But before he stepped fully into the hallway, he spotted Sienna standing alone on a small side balcony, photographing the rain over Elliott Bay. "That angle will get your camera wet," he said, his voice low but clear. Sienna turned, her eyes bright under the golden light. "But it will capture Seattle's soul. You know, in this rain, the city reflects on the water like another version of itself, more beautiful and fragile." Ethan stayed silent, simply looking at her. Those words were nothing like the empty small talk he usually heard at events. "Ethan Hale," he extended his hand. "Sienna Brooks." She shook it, not too firmly, but with enough confidence to be felt. "Pleasure to meet you." The moment was brief, but as Ethan walked away, he knew the image of this woman would linger in his mind. Not because she had accidentally stepped into his world, but because she hadn't been afraid to cross the ice barrier he had built for so many years. 3 days had passed since the launch of Athena. Seattle's rain still fell steadily, thin layers of mist veiling the surface of Elliott Bay. In his 40th floor office at Hale Robotics, Ethan Hale sat before a large screen, lines of code and robot design schematics scrolling in vertical columns against a black background. He had just wrapped up a grueling 3-hour online meeting with the engineering team in Tokyo, their voices still echoing faintly in his mind. Usually, the moment he closed his laptop, his focus would instantly shift to the next project. But today, an image kept slipping into the spaces between his thoughts. A woman with an old camera, dark brown hair, neatly tied up, and an unwavering gaze. Sienna Brooks. He hated this feeling, hated letting a stranger occupy space in his mind. Yet the more he tried to push it away, the more he recalled that moment on the balcony, the sound of rain mingling with her words about another version of the city. Oddly, it wasn't the kind of line he expected from a journalist. Most reporters he'd met were in a hurry, eager to extract information, snapping a few money shots before disappearing. But Sienna was different. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Elaine," he called into the desk intercom. The door opened, and Elaine Carter, his senior assistant and personal secretary, stepped in. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" "Find me the contact information for Sienna Brooks. She's a journalist." Elaine's brow lifted slightly. "From which outlet?" "The science section of the Northwest Times." Surprise flickered clearly in her eyes. Ethan Hale avoided the media like a virus. The last time he had agreed to an interview was 4 years ago. And even then, it had been a dry piece about AI algorithms, not a single word about his personal life. "I'll get right on it," Elaine said with a nod, though her curiosity was obvious. 10 minutes later, a file appeared in his inbox. Ethan glanced only at the phone number and email before speaking curtly. "Contact her. Tell her I'll grant an exclusive interview about Athena. She can choose the time, but it must be here at headquarters." Elaine allowed herself a faint, almost amused smile, as if she'd just witnessed something rare. "Understood, sir." That afternoon in her small Capitol Hill apartment, Sienna opened an email and froze. "Hale Robotics. Invitation for an exclusive interview on Project Athena." She reread it, and again. Ethan Hale was infamous for hating reporters. Not just hating, he dealt with the press in his ruthless way. No responses, no explanations, no lawsuits. Just silence, letting rumors die on their own. And yet here he was, opening the door. Sienna rested her chin on her hand, half tempted to refuse due to a nagging sense that something was off, yet equally driven by curiosity. She had seen the shift in his eyes when he talked about Athena, and she wanted to know, behind that cold armor, what was there. She typed a short reply. "I accept. Friday morning, 9 a.m. Please confirm." That morning, the rain was a fine mist, almost like dust in the air. As she stepped into the lobby of Hale Robotics, Sienna felt as if she were entering another world. Soaring glass walls, polished black stone floors, clusters of staff in suits or white lab coats moving quickly like streams of living data. Elaine met her at the reception desk and led her to a private elevator up to the 40th floor. "Mr. Hale doesn't often grant interviews," Elaine remarked as the elevator rose. "You're an exception." Sienna only smiled, but inside her curiosity deepened. The doors opened to a space flooded with natural light. Ethan's office was stripped to a minimalist severity. A walnut desk, shelves filled with technical manuals, and a few robot prototypes. No flowers, no paintings, nothing unnecessary. Ethan was standing by the window, his back to them. At the sound of footsteps, he turned. The charcoal suit fit perfectly, the dark blue tie catching the light that made the scar on his face more defined. "Ms. Brooks." He gave a slight nod. "Please, have a seat." Sienna sat, switching on her recorder and opening her notebook. "Thank you for your time." "I have 45 minutes, he said, his voice deep, clear, and entirely free of small talk. At first, the conversation was more like a technical briefing. Ethan answered with concise precision, down to the exact numbers. Athena's research timeline, the number of prototypes, the AI algorithms processing medical data, and the safety parameters of the robotic arm. Not a single sentence strayed beyond work. Sienna waited for him to finish before asking, "Why is this project so important to you?" Ethan paused, his gaze flickering briefly. Because it's useful. But dozens of other projects are useful, Sienna countered, her tone gentle but unyielding. I want to know the reason you chose Athena to bring into the spotlight first. He was silent for a few seconds, then sat up straighter. Most medical technology today is concentrated in large hospitals, but patients, especially the elderly, can't always travel. Athena is a way to bring care to them before it's too late. His tone had softened slightly. Sienna noticed and pressed on. This is a vision, not just a product. Do you want Athena to change how we think about healthcare? Ethan's eyes locked onto hers. For the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared. You ask questions like someone who's been an engineer. I just want to understand the root of the idea, Sienna replied, knowing she had touched on a part of him he rarely revealed. In the minutes that followed, the conversation shifted from technical specs to creative philosophy, the responsibility of those who create technology, how to balance innovation with ethics, and the belief that robots could free people's time so they could give it to each other. Ethan no longer spoke like he was delivering a report. He began telling stories about patients in the pilot program, like an older woman who beamed with joy when Athena helped her water her plants every morning. Sienna took notes, but her eyes followed every subtle change in his expression. The warmer tone of his voice, the softer look in his gaze, even the scar seeming less harsh when he spoke about things that truly mattered. When the clock struck 9:45, Ethan concluded, "Time's up." Sienna closed her notebook and switched off the recorder. Thank you. I think readers will be surprised to see a side of Ethan Hale that's different from the Iron Wolf they know. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I don't care what readers think, but if the article makes them pay attention to Athena, then fine. Elaine entered to announce his next meeting. Sienna stood, fastening her coat. Ethan walked her to the office door, pausing slightly as her hand touched the handle. When the article is done, send me the draft first, he said, his tone no longer as cold as at the start. Of course. Sienna smiled, and in that moment, she caught something in his eyes. Not entirely about work. The door closed behind her as she stepped into the elevator. Back on the 40th floor, Ethan stood still for a few seconds, his fingers unconsciously tapping the edge of the desk. He wondered why the interview had gone by so quickly, and why he was already looking forward to the next time they met. Sienna's exclusive interview about Athena was published in the Northwest Times the following week. The article quickly spread across tech forums and social media, but what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the number of shares. It was the way Sienna wrote about him. Not a single word dug into his personal life. She never mentioned the scar or the Iron Wolf nickname the media had branded him with. Instead, the article opened with, when Ethan Hale talks about technology, you forget that in front of you stands a cold billionaire. You only see a man who believes technology should serve people, not replace them. Ethan read that line several times. He'd answered hundreds of questions in his life, but rarely had anyone listened deeply enough to distill this. 2 weeks later, Sienna received an email from Elaine. Mr. Hale would like to invite you to the Athena testing lab in Redmond, if convenient, Wednesday morning. Sienna blinked in surprise. This was an internal facility where the press was rarely allowed to enter. Without hesitation, she replied, agreed. That morning, the Seattle sky was slate gray, rain falling in a light mist. Ethan was waiting for her in person at the security gate, wearing a dark blue shirt, hands in his pockets. When he saw her, he gave a short nod, then swiped his key card to take them both inside the testing facility. Inside was a massive complex, rows of Athena units practicing tasks like administering medicine, lifting patients, cleaning, and preparing meals. The scent of new metal mixed with the aroma of coffee drifted from the engineer's break area. Sienna took a few photos, jotting down quick notes. But when she turned back, she caught sight of Ethan standing still before a particular Athena unit in the corner, as if lost in memory. What's different about that one? She asked gently, walking closer. Ethan started slightly, then looked over at her. It's the first model. I assembled it myself after the lab fire. Sienna fell silent, feeling the heaviness in his tone. That accident, is that what caused? She touched the left side of her face lightly, indicating his scar. He nodded, his eyes leaving hers to rest on the robot. 15 years ago, when I was still a young engineer, I was obsessed with the idea of creating a medical robot that was cheap, durable, and easy to use. Our lab operated almost around the clock. One night, there was a malfunction with an experimental battery circuit. I was the one responsible for the final inspection. He drew in a deep breath, his hand tightening into a fist. The battery exploded. The fire spread through the chemicals. I was closest, and I didn't get one of my colleagues out in time. The last sentence hung in the air like a knife. Sienna felt her throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." Ethan gave a faint shake of his head. From that day on, I understood one thing. My mistakes could kill people. This scar is a reminder that I'm not allowed to make them. I started tightening everything. Every testing process, every business deal. People call me cold, ruthless, and maybe they're right, but I'd rather be called that than relive that night. His voice had dropped lower, stripped of the sharp edge she had heard before, replaced by a rough undertone weighted with years of silence. "Ethan," Sienna hesitated, then asked quietly, "have you ever thought that keeping your distance from everyone is also a way of punishing yourself?" He looked up, his gaze cutting into her, not with anger, but with surprise. "Do you usually ask people questions like that?" "Only the ones I think are worth getting to know," Sienna replied, half teasing, half serious. The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched, as if holding back a smile. "You're right. Maybe I have locked myself away. But with Athena, I'm trying to open another door." They fell silent. The only sounds the whirring of robot motors and the faint clatter of keyboards from the distant engineers. By the time they left the lab, the rain had eased. Ethan walked Sienna to the parking lot. She stood beside her old silver hatchback, turning toward him. "Thank you for sharing today. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about." Ethan studied her for a moment, his eyes weighing something, then nodded. "I didn't plan to, but I figured you wouldn't turn it into a headline." "You figured right," Sienna smiled faintly. "Not every story needs to be for the public." A breeze carried the scent of salt water and the damp resin of pine from the nearby forest. Ethan realized it had been a long time since he'd had a conversation that left him feeling lighter instead of drained. She opened her car door, then paused. "If you ever want to tell the rest of it, I'll listen. Not for an article, just because I want to understand you." Ethan didn't answer right away. Their eyes held for a few seconds, long enough for Sienna to see that there was something he wanted to say, but wasn't ready to. "I'll remember that," he said at last, his voice low and deep. She nodded, slid into her car, and drove away, leaving him standing in the rain-darkened lot. Ethan turned back toward the building, his steps slower than before. In his mind, her words, "I want to understand you," echoed like an invisible thread thrown out that had somehow wrapped itself around the steel armor he'd worn for so long. And he knew, if he let it pull, it would be hard ever to go back to the way things were. That week, the rain seemed endless in Seattle. Heavy clouds hung over the city like a gray blanket, casting everything in muted light. From his 40th floor office, Ethan Hale stood with one shoulder against the glass wall, watching rivulets of rain streak down, reflecting the glow of the freeway lights below. He wasn't the type to let emotions dictate his schedule. Yet ever since the lab visit with Sienna, he'd caught himself doing something rare. 3 times he'd picked up the phone to call her, only to set it back down again. In the end, he chose the safer route, manufacturing a work-related reason. "Elaine," he said when his assistant stepped in, "contact Sienna Brooks. Tell her I'd like updated images and a follow-up piece on Athena during the expanded trial phase." Elaine glanced at him, the corner of her mouth curving as if she understood more than his words revealed. "Yes, sir. I'll arrange it." 3 days later, Sienna arrived at Hale Robotics headquarters, this time in a navy wool coat and a beige knit scarf. Raindrops dotted her hair, and when she unwound the scarf, her face seemed to glow under the lobby's golden lights. Ethan greeted her with a brief nod. "The testing floor has expanded to include a rehabilitation care wing. I think it'll add more depth to the article." "I think so too," Sienna replied, reaching into her bag for her camera. "And thank you for letting me shoot more." They walked the long corridor leading to the new testing area. Here, Athena units were programmed to assist post-surgery patients, helping with mobility exercises, delivering equipment, and even adjusting chairs and beds. Sienna quietly photographed each task, jotting notes with care. Ethan stayed nearby, not intervening, only observing. He noticed she never snapped a photo hastily. Every frame seemed calculated to tell a story, not just about patients or technology, but sometimes about him. In the following weeks, the reasons for collaboration multiplied. One afternoon, Ethan sent her an email. There's a new model home to be photographed for the domestic robotics project. If you're free Thursday. Sienna had laughed when she read it. Architectural photography wasn't exactly her specialty, but she still agreed. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, sleeves of his white shirt rolled up, talking with a group of engineers. I thought you'd hire an architectural photographer for this, she teased. I trust your eye, he said, not looking directly at her, but in a tone meant for her to hear. They moved together through stage rooms showcasing robots tidying, setting tables, and adjusting lighting. At one point, as Sienna stepped back to frame a wide shot, her heels slipped slightly on the freshly polished wood. Ethan's reflexes caught her elbow before she could stumble. The brief contact was enough for her to feel warmth through her coat. She smiled. That's the second time you've saved me from trouble. Ethan released her, glancing away. Don't make it a habit. These work sessions became familiar. One late evening, after finishing a shoot in the manufacturing wing, Sienna was packing up when Ethan appeared at the door. I'm heading back downtown. Do you need a ride? His voice carried the air of a casual offer, but it felt deliberate. Sienna hesitated, then nodded. In the car, rain drummed steadily against the windows, the scent of leather and a hint of mint from the air vents, creating a contained, quiet space. I've noticed you rarely let the press photograph you, she said, gazing out at the rain-blurred city lights. Pictures don't matter. The work matters, he replied. But the public will believe in the work more if they believe in the person behind it. She turned toward him, catching his eyes. And I think they'd believe in you if they saw what I see. Ethan's gaze shifted from hers slowly, as if giving himself a few seconds to lock away whatever had almost surfaced. The collaborations continued. Neither mentioned anything beyond the projects, but something unspoken simmered between them. Every handshake, every silent moment reviewing photos side by side, every exchange glance seemed to add another thin layer to the invisible thread binding them. On a Friday afternoon, Sienna got a call from Elaine. Mr. Hale would like you to attend an Athena demonstration for a group of Japanese investors. It's a closed event, but he said your presence would be helpful. When Sienna arrived, Ethan was standing beside the upgraded Athena model, clad in a gray suit and black tie. He gave her a brief nod before turning to address the guests in fluent Japanese. After the presentation, as the last attendees left, the two of them remained in the display hall. Ethan walked over. Thank you. Your presence made the meeting less tense. I only stood there and took photos, Sienna said with a small smile. Yes, and somehow that was enough. In that moment, the overhead white lights reflected in his eyes, softening them from the cold steel others usually saw. Sienna found herself wanting to ask him something more personal, but held back, and Ethan realized that his excuses for seeing her were growing thinner by the day. But he wasn't ready to stop making them. November in Seattle seemed programmed for rain, not the heavy pounding kind, but fine, endless strands that slipped into every street corner and clung to every awning. That afternoon, Sienna had just finished photographing a pilot Athena project at a nursing home. By the time she stepped outside, the sky had turned a dull pewter, and the wind carried the damp breath of the bay. She pulled her coat collar higher and headed toward the parking lot, only to stop short at the sight of a black Bentley pulled up at the curb, its window sliding down. Get in, Ethan's voice came from behind the wheel. I can drive myself, she said with a smile, gesturing toward her old silver hatchback. The rain's getting heavier, he replied, eyes flicking toward the low clouds piling in from the west. And I owe you a ride back downtown. Sienna hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door and slid in. The door shut with a soft thud, and the outside world was instantly cut off by tinted glass and the steady swish of the wipers. Ethan drove through rain-slick streets, the glow of streetlights smearing into golden streaks across the windshield. Inside, the air was still, the only sound a mellow line of jazz humming softly through the speakers. "Do you always listen to jazz when you drive?" Sienna asked, eyes on the window. "It doesn't get in the way of my thoughts," Ethan answered, short but without his usual chill. By the time they turned onto Capitol Hill, the rain had thickened. Ethan glanced at her. "Your apartment's near here, right?" "Yes, turn left up ahead." The Bentley stopped in front of a 4-story red brick building. Sienna unbuckled, about to thank him, when Ethan said, "Do you have ginger tea?" She blinked, then smiled. "I do." "Why?" "I'll come up," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "To avoid getting soaked, turn the car around." Sienna arched a brow but stepped out and let him inside. Sienna's apartment was nothing like Ethan's office. It was small but warm, the walls lined with photographs she'd taken, misty seascapes, street corners at night, weathered hands cradling a teacup. Stacks of thick books sat alongside potted greenery. The air carried a faint scent of basil and citrus. "Warmer than my office by far," Ethan said as he stepped in, shrugging off his coat, his gaze roaming until it landed on a photo of an Athena unit handing a glass of water to an elderly man. "I like things with stories," Sienna said as she set water to boil. "You want ginger tea?" "Yes." He took a seat at the small dining table, turning the ceramic mug she had set before him. "It reminds me, my grandmother used to make it for me when I had a cold." She tilted her head, slightly surprised. "I didn't think you'd share something about your family." "I didn't think so either," he replied, the corner of his mouth faintly curving. They talked about things that seemed trivial. The time she'd made paella and forgot the saffron, ending up with grayish seafood rice that was still edible. And the time he tried keeping a bonsai in his office to add some life, but let it die because he forgot to water it. The conversation slowed, then settled into a quiet lull. Sienna rested her chin in her hand, looking out the window where the raindrops traced slow, wavering paths down the glass. Ethan was silent for several seconds, his gaze no longer tight. "Do you ever get tired of having to be the one in control of everything?" she asked softly. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Tired, but if I let go, something will fall apart." "Or maybe you just think it will," she said, her voice gentle, yet pressing into the exact space he kept guarded. Ethan didn't answer right away. They sat, eyes locked, the rain's rhythm filling the pause. He realized his hand had tightened around the mug, as if anchoring himself. When Ethan finally stood to leave, he lingered at the door, his hand resting on the knob for a moment. "Thanks for the tea," his voice lower, carrying a trace of something reluctant to leave. "Thanks for the ride," Sienna replied with a small smile. He nodded, stepping into the hallway. But as the door closed behind him, both of them felt something had shifted. Not much, but enough to make them look forward to the next time. That morning began with a fine rain, like someone quietly sprinkling mist over Seattle. Sienna woke earlier than usual. She made coffee, played her usual morning track, and pulled the curtains open to hear the faint tapping of water against the glass. This was her way of starting the day slowly, clearing a space in her mind before the outside world poured in. Her phone buzzed on the table, a string of notifications for new emails and messages. She sipped her coffee, opened her inbox, and the first thing that hit her was a link from a colleague, accompanied by just 2 words. "You okay?" The headline glared back at her like a blade. "Reporter closed to Ethan Hale. Journalism or corporate espionage?" Beneath it was a photo of her standing next to Ethan at last week's closed-door demonstration. Not close enough to touch, no intimate gesture, but the camera angle made them appear far more familiar than reality. The piece didn't accuse her outright. It hid behind neutral questions to imply, did she receive unusual access? Are the glowing features on Hale Robotics covert PR? Then it pulled photos from Sienna's social media, business trips, snapshots of Athena in the lab, stringing them into a timeline of suspicion. It ended with an open hook. "We are continuing to investigate." Sienna scrolled up and down. Her pulse didn't race with panic. Instead, it slowed, heavy as if someone had laid a flat stone on her chest. She knew the mechanics of such pieces. never crossing the legal line into libel, but enough insinuation to make readers believe whatever they wanted. What chilled her wasn't the storm itself, but its forecast. How would Ethan react? Her phone buzzed again. Texts from colleagues. Need us to write a rebuttal? Ignore it, it'll pass in a few days. You okay? She typed back, steady. I'm fine. Don't respond yet. Then she set the phone down and washed her cup. Hot water streamed over her hands, making her realize she was trembling, not from fear, but from worry. Ethan hated noise. The whole city knew that. On the 40th floor of Hale Robotics, Elaine placed an iPad in front of Ethan. Bad news, sir. The screen showed the same article Sienna had just read. Ethan didn't raise a brow, didn't curse. He leaned back slightly in his chair, reading it from start to finish with the cool, tempered look of steel that's been forged and left to age. His calm wasn't apathy, it was habit. When there's a fire, identify the source before spraying water everywhere. Comments? He asked. PR recommends a same-day statement, denying any special access and emphasizing the company's strict security protocols. Legal says not to file suit yet. Do it and cancel my schedule today. Elaine glanced at him. Even the UW Tech School lecture? Yes, make it virtual. He paused. Everything goes virtual until further notice. When she left, the room filled with a dense silence. Ethan swiveled toward the glass wall. Rain streamed down in dense vertical lines, sliding in neat channels like lines of code running endlessly. In his mind, he saw the article's attached photo. Sienna beside him, camera strap over her shoulder, that familiar slant of a smile. Not one meant to please anyone, but the kind of smile someone wears when they have seen something beautiful and can't help showing it. They'll drag her through the mud, he thought, just for standing near me. He was used to being a magnet for debris, rumors, slander, fabrications polished just enough to sound plausible. But Sienna wasn't. She covered science, a quiet corner of journalism, rarely under the paparazzi's glare. And he was the one who'd pulled her into the light. He took a slow, measured breath, the kind he'd taught himself to douse the flames in his head. His post-fire rule: if something could hurt someone, remove the source. If you are the source, step back. Ethan picked up his phone. Her name lit the screen. His thumb hovered over the call icon, then withdrew. What would he even say? Don't worry, it'll blow over? Empty words to someone like her. And any contact now, call, text, could be screenshotted, twisted, turned into another knot tightening around her neck. He set the phone face down and stayed silent. For the first 3 days, silence was a strategy. Sienna told herself that each morning, as she woke to the same soft rain and an inbox still full of request for comment emails, she replied to only one from her editor, stating clearly that she had no special arrangement outside the company's documented press protocols. She didn't post clarifications on social media, didn't argue in comment threads, didn't write any mournful status updates. She kept working, filing articles on time, showing up for shoots. Only, in the middle of these ordinary tasks came moments of such stillness that she could hear her heartbeat, and Ethan's silence stretched like a hallway with no lights. On the 4th day, a letter landed in her mailbox, an exclusive comment request from the same paper that had started the fire. She tore it in half. At lunch, passing through the newsroom lobby, she caught sight of a TV tuned to a tech news segment. A commentator smirked. Of course, we're not asserting anything, but it's interesting to see someone as private as Ethan Hale break his own rules. The anchor nodded. Yes, perhaps this is just a new PR strategy. Sienna pushed through the doors into the rain. Drops spattered her face like a reminder. Breathe, she breathed, and in her pocket, her phone stayed silent. By the 7th day, the sting had changed texture. It was no longer the sharp tang of injustice, but the damp, clinging heaviness of something that wouldn't dry. She wanted to believe Ethan was protecting her by avoiding all contact. But another voice whispered, or is he retreating to his safest place, his shell of control? That afternoon, she took her camera to a repair shop she trusted. The old technician ran expert fingers along the body. Still as solid as the day you bought it? He said with a smile, then lowered his voice. A lot of noise online, huh? Don't let it make you change your grip. A camera that fits your hand is like a person that fits your heart. Once you change, it's hard to find the feeling again. She thanked him. Outside, a sudden burst of rain swept the street. She stood under the awning, watching people dash for cover. For a fleeting moment, Ethan's face appeared in the rain. Serious, straight-backed, gray eyes keeping their distance from the world. She reached her hand out, catching a single drop in her palm. I don't need you to hold up the whole sky. I need you not to disappear. 2 full weeks. That morning, the rain had stopped, leaving a sky the color of scratched silver. Sienna was working from home, her laptop open to her following interview notes, when the doorbell rang. She looked up, pausing mid-step. Through the peephole, unmistakable gray eyes stared back. His hair was damp, his dark coat soaked in patches as though he'd walked halfway across the city. She opened the door. Cool, damp air swept in. Ethan! Her voice dropped instinctively, steadying itself. I owe you an apology, he said, low and without a single detour. She stepped aside to let him in. The door shut, and the world contracted to the small room filled with photographs and plants. Ethan stood just inside, as if he'd just stepped ashore after a long crossing. I thought silence would protect you, he said, meeting her gaze, every word measured like in his negotiations, but now carrying an undercurrent he couldn't hide. If I called, if I texted, they'd have more fuel to pull you in deeper. I chose to disappear, and that was wrong. For days, Sienna had prepared for anything. Debate, deflection, even returning silence for silence. But his words knocked the air from her chest. She sat on the edge of a chair, placing her hands on her knees to keep grounded. Do you know, she began slowly, silence can be loud too. It says, I'm not brave enough. It says, I choose safety over standing beside you in the storm. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, then opened them as if stepping through a narrow doorway. I was afraid, he said, short, sharp, like a blade. Not to wound, but to cut through the rope binding him. I've lived believing that if I let someone close, they'll touch places that could destroy me. And with you, I couldn't bear the thought. She studied him. In the soft light of late afternoon, the silver scar from temple to jaw seemed less harsh. She rose and walked toward him slowly, giving him every chance to turn away. He didn't. Ethan, she said gently, I don't need you to be the hero of every storm. I need you not to run when you hear the thunder. A faint smile, thin as pencil lead, crossed his lips, the kind born of being understood exactly where he thought he'd hidden best. He nodded once, like sealing a contract he dared to sign with his heart. I'll learn, he said. Not in a day, but I'll learn to stay. This silence was different. It wasn't heavy, wasn't suffocating. It was the kind of space just big enough for 2 people to hear each other breathe. In the kitchen, the kettle clicked off. Sienna poured hot water into a ceramic mug, dropped in slices of ginger. Ginger tea, she asked. Yes, he said softly. This time, not just for a cold. She handed him the cup, their fingers brushing. Not hurried, not prolonged, but enough to mark something new. We're here, despite the noise outside. Rain began again in a fine layer on the window. Somewhere in the city, a new article was likely being drafted. Somewhere in his company, a press release was being approved. But here, in a small apartment lit with warm yellow light and the scent of ginger, 2 people sat across from each other, relearning the most complex skill: staying. Ethan set his cup down and looked up. If you want me to speak publicly, I will. I'll talk about the process, your professionalism, and the respect I have for your work. I'll take every hit. Sienna shook her head, a brief smile breaking like a thin band of sunlight. They'll call it PR. Let me handle my part. You don't disappear again. I won't, he said, slow and clear, as if hard-coding a new rule into his operating system. Outside, the rain changed rhythm, no longer falling straight, but blown sideways across the city. Sienna looked toward the window, where the glass reflected a smaller version of them. 2 figures side by side, framed in countless lines of water. And she thought, storms aren't just what come down from the sky. Storms can rise when someone begins to feel exposed. But it's in the storm that you learn who will stand still beside you. Quietly, she asked, then, shall we start over? Ethan nodded. Start over. And this time, neither of them left first. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Top of form, bottom of form. The confirmation text from Ethan came on a Monday morning. Geneva International Technology Conference, next week. Come with me? No flowers, no heart emoji, but to Sienna it was more official than any bouquet. She replied, yes. And when the plane touched down in Switzerland, she knew she had stepped into a new chapter, not collaborations by excuse or chance encounters, but being by his side, openly. Geneva International Conference Center. The main hall blazed with light from massive LED screens displaying the logos of the world's leading tech corporations. CEOs, scientists, journalists, and investors moved through the crowd, a sea of suits and gleaming name badges. Ethan appeared in a deep navy suit and silver tie, the scar still visible but no longer the defining feature of his face. Beside him, Sienna wore a long turquoise dress, her hair in a low bun, her camera still slung over her shoulder, a clear statement she wasn't abandoning her work. As they entered, heads turned immediately. Ethan neither avoided the attention nor quickened his stride as he often did. He matched his pace to hers, and when shaking hands with partners, he introduced her without hesitation. This is Sienna Brooks, science journalist. No my girlfriend or any other label, but the way he said it made it clear she was a significant presence. Sienna noticed the curiosity in some people's eyes, but no one was disrespectful. Perhaps because, in this world, Ethan was not a man anyone wanted to antagonize carelessly. That afternoon, during a break, they stood by the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, hot espresso steaming in their hands. Sienna teased, "You're breaking one of your own rules." What rule? The always go alone, always leave before anyone can ask personal questions rule. Ethan's mouth curved faintly. I'm testing a new algorithm. And the first data point? The data suggests, he leaned in slightly, there are some exceptions worth keeping. She laughed, the sounds scattering into the cold wind off the lake. Seattle 1 week later. The Geneva story traveled back to the city quickly, not through tabloids but via photos from industry colleagues posted on LinkedIn. Ethan Hale talking with a Japanese expert, Sienna listening beside him. The captions were professional, not speculative. Both realized that by appearing together in a professional context, they had defined their narrative on their terms. Ethan began bringing Sienna to more events, not just large conferences, but small dinners with longtime associates and trusted friends. Sienna realized these people formed a tiny, durable circle around him. Engineers who had been with him since the startup days, an elderly investor who once saved his company from a bad deal, and a handful of old friends outside tech who understood the value of silence. At a dinner in a small Italian restaurant by the bay, as dessert arrived, one of Ethan's associates, an older man named Marcus, leaned toward Sienna. Thank you for getting this, kid, he gestured at Ethan. To say more than 4 sentences a night. Sienna smiled. I just asked the right questions. Marcus chuckled. That's a skill worth more than capital. Ethan sat beside her, silent, but his gaze was warm. Ethan wasn't the only one inviting. Sienna began opening her world to him as well. One Friday night, she texted, "Tonight, a reporter get-together at a little bar. Coming?" His reply was just, "Address?" The bar was in the basement of an old building, lit with warm amber lights, the smell of craft beer mingling with soft acoustic music. No one wore suits here. People held pints, talking over each other in comfortable noise. When Sienna walked in with Ethan, several of her colleagues froze mid-sentence, eyes turning in unison, not because of his scar or the understated elegance of his suit, but because Ethan Hale, the famously private man who had declined interviews from even the most prominent outlets, was suddenly standing in the middle of a journalist's gathering. Someone muttered, "No way." Another nudged a friend and whispered, "This must be Sienna's exclusive scoop." A few gazes held a mix of curiosity, surprise, and caution. Sienna broke the tension with a grin. "Everyone, This is Ethan Hale. Yes, that Ethan Hale. And no, he's not here to audit anyone. Laughter rippled through the group, easing the air. Ethan shook hands with each person, listening far more than he spoke. But when someone asked about the Athena project, he answered plainly. No fluff, no evasive PR sound bites, just the straightforward truth about its capabilities and goals. His voice was calm but firm, and that alone was enough for a few in the group to exchange glances, as if quietly reconsidering their image of the cold, iron wolf they'd read about. The text from Ethan arrived late in the afternoon, 2000, Hale Robotics Rooftop. No explanation, no greeting, no emoji. Very Ethan. But it was precisely that mystery that left Sienna both curious and a little breathless. When the elevator doors slid open, the ocean wind from Elliott Bay rushed in, cold and faintly salty. Sienna stepped out, then froze in place. The rooftop, usually nothing more than a bare expanse of gray walls and ventilation pipes, had been transformed into a romantic garden. Along the railing, dozens of paper lanterns glowed in soft gold, swaying gently in the breeze. Pots of pristine white orchids curved in an arc, their petals trembling under the light. Far off, Elliott Bay shimmered with the reflection of city lights on the water. A sudden gust swept across, and Sienna shivered. She hadn't yet moved when a warm hand settled on her shoulder. Ethan was standing right behind her, his gaze as deep as the night itself. Without a word, he slipped off his thick black coat and draped it over her shoulders. The movement was slow, deliberate, letting his hand brush lightly along her bare arm, leaving a trail of heat against her cool skin. "The wind's colder up here than I remembered," he murmured, his voice low, close to her ear, his warm breath grazing her hair. "I don't want you to be cold, especially tonight." Sienna turned toward him, meeting his eyes. For a moment, she forgot she was standing high above the city. All she could see was the steady, intense look in those eyes, powerful enough to pull her closer without asking. "Orchids?" she asked, reaching out to touch a nearby bloom, as if needing something to ground herself. Ethan's lips curved slightly, just enough to catch the light. "I started growing them during therapy after the fire. My doctor said I needed something that forced me to be patient, something I couldn't control with money or influence. I didn't think it was for me, but—" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "I was wrong." "Because you made it work," she said softly. "Not just that." His gaze held hers, unblinking. "I realized, you're like these flowers. You make me want to stay, to wait, to care for something, not for profit, not for the win, but because you're worth protecting. You make me want to be a better man." Sienna's heartbeat thundered. She knew Ethan's reputation: cold, ruthless in business, a strategist who never gave ground. And yet here he was, standing in front of her, stripped bare in words, revealing a part of himself no one else had seen. She reached up, her fingertips brushing the scar along his cheek, tracing the uneven curve gently. "You've always been better than you think, Ethan. You just never let anyone see it." For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then Ethan's arm slid around her waist, drawing her in, the scent of warm cedar wood surrounding her. "Give me the chance to prove it to you." "I think you've been doing that for a while now," she whispered, her breath mingling with his. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in, and their lips met. At first it was light, a careful taste, as if testing the water. But then, as if both realized how long they'd been holding back, the kiss deepened, burning with unspoken need. His hand pressed against her back, pulling her close until there was no space left between them. Sienna's arms wound around his neck, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart against her own. The cold bay wind only made his warmth burn hotter against her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his voice husky. "Here, between the lights and the waves. I'm not leaving." Sienna smiled, her cheeks flushed under the lantern glow. "And I'm not letting you go anywhere." They stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the Seattle night wrap around them, together with the soft scent of orchids and the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore. The morning in the suburbs of Seattle was wrapped in a thin layer of mist. In the quiet garden, the orchid greenhouse glowed in the first sunlight like a crystal-clear gem. Inside, hundreds of white, purple, and pale yellow orchids were in full bloom, releasing a gentle fragrance. Strands of tiny lights strung along the steel frames reflected in the eyes of the guests, mostly close friends and trusted associates of Ethan and Sienna. There were no reporters, no jostling cameras, only the warmth of people who truly wished them happiness. Ethan stood at the end of the aisle, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The sharp lines of his face and the long scar down his left cheek stood out in the light. It had once made him look cold and unapproachable, but today, under Sienna's gaze, it carried a different meaning, a part of the man she loved. When the music began, Sienna appeared. Her white wedding gown hugged her figure, the low back revealing smooth skin. Her hair was styled in a soft bun, adorned with small white orchids. She walked down the petal-strewn aisle, her eyes locked on his. "You're so beautiful, I wish I could stop time right now," Ethan whispered softly as he took her hand. They exchanged brief vows, but each word felt engraved deep within them. "You make me want to be a better man, and to be someone you can be proud of. I promise to always stand by you, not only on the easy days, but on the hardest ones too." Their kiss lingered longer than ceremony etiquette allowed. Applause filled the greenhouse as orchid petals drifted gently onto his shoulder. Ethan leaned down, murmuring in her ear, "The 1-month journey begins today, Mrs. Hale." They arrived in Tokyo. During the day, they attended a medical technology conference where Ethan presented Athena, a home healthcare robot. Sienna sat in the front row, her eyes full of pride as she watched him answer each challenging question from Japanese experts with ease. After the presentation, they toured a robotics research institute together. Sienna was surprised when Ethan, usually reserved in front of the press, proudly introduced her to the engineers as "my wife," his pride unmistakable. That evening, Tokyo was draped in a light rain. As soon as they returned to the hotel room, Ethan set his laptop aside and pulled her into his arms. "I was thinking about you the whole time I was on stage," he murmured, kissing her shoulder, his voice hoarse from both exhaustion and desire. The kiss deepened, his hand gliding over the smooth skin of her bare back. Outside the window, the rain seemed to fall faster, matching the rhythm of their hearts. All night, they forgot the clock was ticking. Next, they went to Singapore. They attended a gathering with medical investors and startups. With her background as a journalist, Sienna skillfully steered conversations, easing the tension in the room. After the meeting, a major partner whispered to Ethan, "Your wife is wonderful. She makes people want to hear you speak more." That night, they strolled under the glowing super trees at Gardens by the Bay. Purple, blue, and golden lights spilled down, casting shimmering halos on Sienna's hair. Ethan draped his suit jacket over her shoulders, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I don't just need you in my life. I need you in my work. You make me see the world differently." Sienna turned, her lips meeting his in a sweet kiss, one filled with promise for the long night ahead. In Zurich, they attended an exhibition on AI in healthcare. Ethan negotiated a collaboration deal while Sienna stood beside him, taking notes for an article she planned to publish when they returned. That night, heavy snow fell. Wrapped together in a blanket on the balcony, they gazed out at Lake Zurich, glittering under the lights. Ethan poured red wine and handed her a glass. "We'll build a research center like this in Seattle. But," he paused, his eyes locking deeply with hers, "without you, I won't do it." Sienna set her glass down, wrapping her arms around his neck. Their kiss carried the taste of snow, wine, and all the sleepless nights they had shared. They pulled each other back into the room, leaving the world outside. In the warm space, their breaths mingled, hands searching for each other as if it were both the first and the last time. Both their work and their lives were now bound together, just as tightly as they held each other that night. Morning in Zurich was dusted with snow as fine as powdered sugar. From the hotel room window, Lake Zurich stretched out in a silvery gray, the rooftops of old buildings catching the first light of winter sun. Ethan was sitting at the table, reviewing a few draft contracts when he heard the soft click of the bathroom door opening. Sienna stepped out, wrapped in a white robe, her hair still damp. Her expression wasn't exactly worried, but there was a hint of hesitation that made him look up immediately. "Ethan," her voice was barely a breath. "I think, maybe, I might be pregnant." Without a moment's pause, he shot to his feet. Papers scattered to the floor, but he didn't care. In one long stride, he was in front of her, his warm hands gently cupping her face before pulling her into his arms. He didn't speak at first. Only the sound of his heartbeat quickened, as if trying to catch up to the news he'd just heard. Then he gave a quiet laugh, though his eyes were suddenly moist. "You just gave me everything I once thought I could never deserve," he whispered against her ear, his deep voice trembling slightly. Sienna's arms came around him, feeling the familiar breadth of his shoulders and the warmth of his body. "I'm not sure yet," she said softly, "but this time feels different." Ethan drew back slightly, looking deep into her eyes. "We'll be sure. As soon as we get back to Seattle, we'll check. But Sienna," he placed his hand over her stomach, a gesture both tender and protective. "No matter what, I still want a family with you." They sat down together on the long couch by the window, snow falling quietly outside. Ethan never let go of her hand. "You know, I used to think you only lived for your work," Sienna teased, half serious. "And you were right, until I met you," he replied, his gaze full of both pride and gratitude. "You've made me want more than contracts and board meetings. Now I want to go home and hear your laughter, and the sound of little feet running down the hall." They began to talk about the future, not as rigid plans, but like painting a picture together. A house by the sea, where mornings would be filled with the sound of waves. A shared workspace, so Ethan and Sienna could pursue their passions without missing a single moment with their child. Short weekend trips, discovering new technology while letting the child grow up in a wide-open world. "I want our child to grow up knowing that love and respect are the foundation of everything," Sienna said, gently tightening her hold on his hand. "I promise," Ethan said seriously. "I'll be a good father, and I'll always love their mother exactly as I do right now." He bent down to kiss her, not urgent, not fiery like the nights before, but a deep, lingering, and warm kiss, like a vow for a new chapter in their lives. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside that room, something new was already beginning to take root. Late November in Seattle wore its familiar coat of rain. Showers fell in gentle but persistent waves, wrapping the city in a misty veil. Streetlights cast golden reflections across the wet pavement, creating a scene that was both solitary and romantic. Since returning to Seattle, Ethan had remained the CEO of Hale Robotics, but everyone around him had noticed an apparent change. He was no longer the work machine who only cared about cold numbers. His meetings now included questions about social impact, about how each project would truly benefit people. He had established the Hale STEM Scholarship Fund specifically for young women passionate about technology, aiming to award at least 50 scholarships each year, paired with mentorship from the company's top engineers. Invested in community-focused medical technology projects, particularly initiatives that helped elderly and disabled patients live more independently. Rolled out Athena, his home healthcare robot, free of charge to dozens of nursing homes across the state. Videos of residents laughing as they chatted with Athena or getting help with physical therapy from the robot had gone viral, inspiring thousands online. What surprised Ethan was that he didn't feel any loss when he devoted time and resources to community projects. On the contrary, every time he received a handwritten letter from an elderly resident or a schoolgirl in a remote town, he felt a quiet but profound joy, a feeling he once thought he'd never know. Their new penthouse sat on the top floor of a building near the harbor, overlooking Elliott Bay. Each night, as the city sank into the sound of rain and the distant crash of waves, the warm golden light from their home shone like a beacon of peace in the damp Seattle sky. Tonight was no different. Ethan had just finished an online meeting with his engineering team in Tokyo. He closed his laptop, rolled his shirt sleeves up slightly, and walked to the kitchen. On the counter, the kettle was clicking softly. He dropped a few jasmine tea buds into a glass teapot, steam curling upward with a sweet, delicate scent. Sienna sat by the window wrapped in a cream cardigan, her legs folded on the sofa, eyes fixed on the curtain of rain. The light from the reading lamp cast a warm halo around her, etching the image into his mind. He walked over and set the tea tray down on the small table. "Hot tea," he said, his voice low but laced with tenderness he couldn't hide. Sienna turned to smile at him. Ethan poured the tea into a cup, sat down beside her, one hand offering the cup, the other resting lightly on her belly. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his eyes still on the spot where his hand lay. "Normal. Just a little sleepier than usual," she said with a soft laugh. He stayed silent for a moment, listening to the patter of rain on the glass. Then, speaking slowly as if afraid to break the moment, he said, "I used to think I'd live alone my whole life. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't believe anyone would accept me as I am." Sienna squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "But you were wrong." Ethan nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small but genuine smile. "Yes, I was wrong. Now I have you, and soon our child. I still can't believe how lucky I am." For years, whenever Ethan looked in the mirror, all he saw was the long scar running from his left cheekbone down near his jawline, a reminder of the lab fire years ago. Combined with his reserved, aloof nature, he had become the kind of man the press liked to call ruthless and unapproachable. Now, though the scar remained, he no longer saw it as an ugly mark to hide. It was part of the story that had brought him here beside the woman he loved, touching the small life growing inside her day by day. Sienna could still recall the first time she had seen him truly smile. Not the polite smile for business partners, but the genuine one he wore when telling her about an older woman in a nursing home who had used Athena to video call her granddaughter across the country. That smile had erased every harsh label the media had pinned on him. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, its steady rhythm a perfect soundtrack for the evening. Ethan reached out, pulling Sienna closer so her head rested on his shoulder. "You know," he murmured, "I can't promise to be a perfect man, but I promise to be the husband and father you and our child can always rely on, through sunshine or storms." Sienna didn't answer right away. She tilted her head, pressing a gentle kiss to his jawline, right where the scar began. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you like this." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He held her closer, letting their warmth blend together. In that moment, he knew he had traveled far from the cold, closed-off man he once was. He had stepped into a different life, one filled with love, hope, and the days that awaited them. He was no longer the man no one wanted. Now he was a husband, soon to be a father, and above all, a man loved without condition.